So let's look a little closer at the miniatures coming out for Warhammer 40k's next major release wave, and how these fancy characters might impact their factions. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought we'd take a focused look at the next wave of Warhammer 40k characters to come out, these guys associated with Games Workshop's 500 Worlds campaign. These guys were revealed at their last major preview online, the big one around the time of the World Champions of Warhammer. Quite a few of them aren't expected to come out until 2026, though I believe with Titus and Nekrosor Ammentar, they weren't quite so direct at saying that they were definitely 2026. Maybe there's a small chance they could be the last major 40k release of this year, otherwise they'll be in January. In any case though, let's go through each of these in turn, talk briefly about the new miniature and any fun details on it, the lore and how they fit into the 40k universe, and a few things that we might potentially expect for gameplay, though hints for this were admittedly a bit on the limited side. Starting out, let's go with the Necrons first, and this guy is Nekrosor Ammentar, and seems that he's initially going to be the primary antagonist of Titus in the 500 Worlds campaign, the reclamation of Ultramar going directly up against some Necrons that want to destroy all life. This guy is a named Destroyer Lord character, and supposedly he's the first Destroyer Lord, origin of the Destroyer Curse, where basically the Necrons decide to augment their bodies as living weapons, and try and wipe out all the living races in the universe. Over and above normal Lords and Destroyer Lords, this guy's apparently able to corrupt the codes of the Necrons nearby, and draw a pretty vast army to his thrall, many of which are of course upgraded to Destroyers, though they hold sway over vast armies of conventional Necron war assets as well. Apparently there's some hints that he might have been a rather important character in the past of the Necrons, maybe having had some sort of interactions with Zarek the Silent King before. Maybe a top general or triarch member under him, whatever it is the Silent King has felt needs to suppress all knowledge of him, so he remains a mystery and legend to the rest of the Necrons. His rather mad goal is to put the Nightbringer back together, the star god that the Necrons overcame and shattered into shards. I'm sure if he was able to create a super powerful shard of the Nightbringer, that star god would probably gladly assist with wiping out a whole bunch of life. Overall, he feels like a fun character, and all very old Trons in nature, back when they were more perhaps murderous killer robots and the Catan were the ones in charge. His miniature basically feels like a very heavily augmented Ophidian destroyer. He has the similar sort of enormous whipcoil tail as they do, but bigger and nastier. He's armed with two big though rather asymmetrical claws that are looking rather blood-spattered here, and then those are backed up by a whole bunch of mecha tentacle things and some hyperphase weapons. I quite like the glowing Necron orb things on his back as well. They look rather more diseased and sick looking here, as opposed to more standard well-maintained Necron technology. For model looks, out of this recent wave of miniatures, you rated him a 4 out of 5, the second most popular sculpt of the lot of him. He does look like quite an imposing presence and a nicely balanced, creepy sculpt. As a slightly chunkier character model though, and a named one at that, I really wouldn't be too surprised if Games Workshop charged more for him than people would probably hope for. He's got quite a big built-up scenic base, and is a fairly chunky model in himself, based on say Lord Marshal Dreyer for the Astra Militarum, the cavalry character. He might be around £38 or $60 or so. I guess it's possible he could be a little cheaper. It does feel like they're a bit variable with these ones. Here's another shot of his model from a different angle, and they also have made a bunch of artwork for these new characters as well. It seems that enjoyment of the looks also translates well into people wanting to pick up the miniature. 213 of you reported wanting to buy one of these guys, also making him ranked at second out of the 6 models. Necrons are a pretty big, widely collected and followed faction, particularly after 9th edition. Rules wise, we'll likely find out these guys' rules via digital download when Games Workshop gets around to sharing them. In their previews they didn't really give too many specific rules teasers. Just from the look of the model and their role within the army though, you can infer a few things. My guess for this guy is that he'd probably be able to join the Ophidian destroyers. Maybe there's a chance he'll be able to join the Scorpet destroyers as well, given he's a named Destroyer Lord. We know the stats for the Scorpet Lord, who had 7 wounds at toughness 7 with a 3+ save and a 4+ invulnerable. He might not quite have the same amount of toughness as them and might have a bit more movement as per the Ophidians, but I certainly expect his stats to be somewhere in that sort of area. With destroyers having their whole thing just being killing things, it seems like he's got good odds to be a fair melee powerhouse. He's got 2 big and dangerous claws and then a whole bunch of auxiliary limbs as well. Based on how Games Workshop often handles those in 10th edition, it seems there's a good chance that he might have a main profile then a whole bunch of extra attacks that could handle horde things. Finally, we do know that there's Necron detachments coming in the 500 Worlds book. A recent trend with new detachments that are associated with character releases is often to give some extra special rules for the characters within those detachments, so perhaps we'll get something similar to the Space Marine ones where if he's present in one of those given detachments, then he gets an extra special rule either conferred to him or the army. I'd guess we'll get at least one of those detachments being just a balanced force that he is leading. and then either ones focusing on destroyers or Catan seem like good bets for the others. In any case, it's certainly looking like a pretty fun character sculpt to add to the Necrons lineup. Before I move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Tabletop Stronghold. They're one option to get your miniatures from A to B, with magnetic transport cases made by Sam based in the USA, and at time of video release they're currently on their biggest sale of the year, with their Black Friday release having around 40% off their cases. Magnetic storage is the most popular way to get models from A to B these days, attaching magnets to the bases of your miniatures, then you put them on metal sheets within a box, meaning that you can store lots of miniatures side by side, not rattling around or anything, and you can store loads of figures in one really dense space without the need for insulating foam. Tabletop Stronghold's take on these is a case made out of notably sturdy MDF, very hard to break or damage, and then within that case you slot multiple rows worth of steel trays. You can put them higher or lower depending on the height of the miniatures that you want to transport. On the front of the case goes a clear acrylic sheet, meaning the miniatures are protected, and also you can see what's where and display your handiwork as it's being stored or transported. Generally speaking, reviews of these that I've seen have been pretty positive, both down in the YouTube comments and over on Reddit and places. As well as their cases, they also have a terrain set as well. That's a little cheaper if you buy alongside a case. If you'd like to check them out, there'll be links down in the video description. I'll also cycle back to talk about their cases at the end of the video as well. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring this one. Next up, Nekrosor Ammentar isn't the only model to be released for the Necrons though, as we also have the rather spectacular Catan shard of the Nightbringer, initially leaked in a Kill Team dossier before the preview went out, but it certainly didn't do anything to dispel hype for this guy. The Nightbringer is the ancient Necron star deity, the living aspect of death, supposedly the figure of death in the 40k universe, with a hood and a scythe, is imprinted on the various races through this guy. The Star Gods betrayed the Necrons during the biotransference, devouring their souls, and then the Necrons betrayed them in turn, shattering them into Catan shards, which they can now unleash on the battlefield. They specifically stated that Nekrosor Ammentar had multiple fragments of this living god of death in his arsenal, each one of which being a ridiculously powerful foe to overcome. The miniature is a pretty epic centerpiece update to the previous Nightbringer sculpt that we had, redone Void Dragon style, much bigger than the old metal then resin sculpt of the Nightbringer, holding out his scythe aloft behind him, a twisted hood and cape billowing around him that dissolves into pixels and lightning, and scarabs swirling around him being held up by the same lightning. Certainly feels like he does the job of being a spooky eldritch deity. Overall, people have been really quite happy with his miniature. In my polls, you rated him a 4.5 out of 5. Easily the best received miniature out of this set from this release wave, and it's really quite rare to see a 40k release quite this well received just in general. I'd guess his likely price will be pretty chunky though. If he's the same price as the Void Dragon, that'll be £80, $130 or €105, so he's not going to come cheap. Games Workshop themselves did a side-by-side comparison of old Nightbringer versus the new one. As you can see, just enormously bigger and more imposing there. It's pretty cool to see him get a proper update. It does feel like it's been a gradual trend over the last decade or so for plenty of miniatures from that era, such as the Avatar of Cain or the Greater Demons. Here's a few other pictures of the Star God from different angles as well. Despite likely being pricey, he looks like he's the single most popular miniature that people want to pick up. 261 people saying that they wanted to buy him from my polls, so a fair bit ahead of Nekrosor Ammentar. Interestingly, despite being perhaps the only miniature out of these ones that doesn't need a new datasheet, Games Workshop still say they're going to give him one. It just seems to be their policy at the moment that when you resculpt the miniatures, you give them some new rules, even if the current Nightbringer's rules are really quite big and imposing. I feel like do enough to live up to this guy. He's already a massive powerhouse of damage and defense, able to go toe to toe with most other things stat-wise for his points cost. At his Necron Codex release points cost, he was arguably a bit on the broken side, though it's generally considered far more balanced now after some points increases, and it does have the big notable weakness of only being able to move 6 inches. I'm really not too sure what they do differently with his datasheet. I wouldn't imagine there'd be crazy enormous changes to it. I do kind of wonder if they might have the Catan moving a little faster though. Going just the 6 inches does feel kind of weirdly slow, just from the size and look of the model. Otherwise, there's definitely the potential for extra rules and things from those detachments that are coming out. I do wonder if that teaser about Mr. Ammentar having multiple of these might be an excuse for Games Workshop to say that you can field more than one in one given detachment or something, which I'm sure Games Workshop themselves will get on board with quite a bit if they've got the chance to sell multiple of these to some people. One theme within their army that the Necrons don't have a focus on so far is having a Catan shard focused attachment. That could potentially be one of the new ones, though I feel like they'd have to play carefully with that and probably go with some quite conservative rules if they do so, as I don't think they'd really want Catan spam to be a particularly mainstream way to play Necrons again. Next up, we move on to the forces of the Tau Empire, and they had an interesting character reveal called the Twin Lance, basically a pair of named hero-level Shazvir characters, so more sort of battlesuit leaders as opposed to commander rank. And the origin story of these apparently had them avenge their commander Darkflame when they were slain by a Genestealer cult patriarch, these two jumping in to absolutely annihilate the Genestealer cult at close range. And since then the Ethereals have spread their fame around the Tau Empire, wanting to hold them up as the exemplars of the discipline of Montkar with the killing blow, as due to being a renegade breakaway they can't use Commander Farsight for that anymore. These two now take to the fight in new Warmaker battlesuits. One's called Sonseer and is armed with a fusion weapon, the other one called Scatterflare and has an anti-infantry weapon. The battlesuits have some funky neocapacitor shields, and it seems they have their own slightly odd looking turquoise and bone coloured heraldry. The Ethereals wanting them to be exemplified as heroes of the Empire as opposed to any one sept. The new battlesuits seem to have been received well enough, fairly chunky up-armoured crisis suits. They certainly seem to have been purging some enemies at close range as they have a whole bunch of flames all over their bases. That fusion weapon is called a Fusion Eliminator, and the other one is an Ion Scatter Cannon. The two of them also seem to have pistols, plus they have a pair of gun drones, and a few other interesting details on their miniatures. It seems that the two of them have two different halves of a shattered bonding knife. The battlesuits seem to have some inlaid studs and some sort of technical finery sort of things. Overall, they're an unusual offering, but pretty well received as they go. You guys gave them a 3.8 out of 5. Price-wise, I'm really not too sure where these guys are going to land. My first guess will be roughly the same amount as the Crisis Battlesuit team, and they're £54 or $89. You get 3 Crisis suits in that one. It looks like these guys might be just a little bigger, and Games Workshop does like to exert the named character tax. It also seems like they're going to be popular miniatures. The Tau Empire are another popular faction, not so very far behind Nekrosor Ammentar. Rules-wise, with their own class of battlesuits, it seems unlikely they'd be joining any other units. And then for these two, it felt like we had a few more hints at their rules compared with some of the other models out there. As exemplars of Montkar, they're close-range specialists, so their guns will either be better at short range or maybe more effective the closer they get. Melter certainly would check out there. Maybe that scatter cannon's just going to have a 12-inch range or rapid fire or something. It kind of stands to reason that the fusion is going to be the one to take down tanks or monsters, and the scatter cannon to hit hordes. And they did specifically say they're known for their hit-and-run assaults, and to me that implies they're going to be fairly fast-moving and might have some sort of reactive move style thing, maybe being able to move, shoot, move built in, or be able to jump to safety if the enemy tries to threaten them. It sounds like for their special rules, their shields might be able to reflect a bit of damage. They stated that they're going to be able to absorb energy from incoming attacks before unleashing it as a concussive burst. There are a few rules out there in 40k that have some bounce back invulnerable saves, trigger mortal wounds on the enemy. Maybe we'll get one of those. I'll admit though, at least for the most part, those rules can be a bit on the underwhelming side when they crop up. Otherwise, I guess they're going to have a few extra shots from those pistols, though likely as vehicles they'll be able to fire their other weapons in melee as well. It seems that the gun drones have pulse blasters as opposed to pulse carbines, so again doubling down on being super close range there. And to me the battlesuits look a bit beefed up, and particularly with the shields on them, I expect them to be a bit tougher to take down versus the crisis suits. I guess they'll have something between extra toughness, wounds, or saving throws. I don't know if those inlaid gold bits are supposed to represent iridium armor or something. In any case, if they balance their points right, seems like they could be fun. I guess they might have a bit of competition for things like commanders with some forged suits, which can also hit things super hard at close range. Next up, we have the man of the hour himself, with Dimitri and Titus stepping up to take over the reins as captain of the second company of the Ultramarines, and apparently also tasked by the Primarch of leading the reconquest of the 500 worlds. Obviously, he is pretty well known from Space Marine 2, the events of that game restoring Titus to honour after formerly having some self-imposed exile in the Death Watch. And since the events of that game, Chiron and Captain Acheron are believed to be slain by a Genestealer cult, leaving Titus and his plans to restore Ultramar to former glory. His new miniature is a fairly standard looking Space Marine Captain one, big cloak and furs, lots of Ultramarines heraldry, leaning on his chainsword and standing on a small tactical rock there, pairing his chainsword with a bolt carbine, and I think having quite a lot better of a head sculpt compared with his previous version. It feels like his model went down nicely enough, maybe not exactly stand out for yet another Space Marine Captain of a different flavour, even if he is one backed up by a whole bunch of lore. He's going to be sold alongside his Wardens of Ultramar. I'm really not sure as to the price of the overall squad there. I might speculate around say £47 or $77. That's the same amount as the Necron Geomancer kill team right now. There maybe aren't a huge amount of examples of a named character leading a big command squad. He might be a little cheaper than that I suppose, and they could price him at a similar sort of amount to the company heroes. His Captain miniature is a fairly nice update on the previous Lieutenant one that came out for Space Marine 2. As Space Marine sculpts go, that one garnered a bit more of a mixed reaction with the posing and its face. Though as mentioned, his captain miniature isn't alone here, and it seems that he's coming in a box set alongside his Wardens of Ultramar, with 2 famous faces out of the Space Marines, and then 4 high-ranking mortals of Ultramar to help him in his reconquest. For the Space Marines, we have veteran Sergeant Matoris. He's Titus' recruiter and mentor, and we saw him in action in the secret level animation. He was using a power axe there, though he's got a power sword here. Aside from an appropriate head sculpt and some Ultramarines iconography, it's not really so very different from other Blade Guard models really. And then also alongside we've got Gadriel, who's been promoted to an Ancient now, and he's carrying a sculpted plastic rendition of the banner of the Ultramarine 2nd Company. That one's pretty much the same as iconography from the past there. Again, aside from the head sculpt and the banner, a straightforward enough Ultramarines miniature, with a few icons, charms and purity seals. It looks like he's armed with a bolt rifle, I think with a few kill markings along the side of it there. Then accompanying them into battle are the Mortals. There's a Fleet Master guy with a laurel wreath looking at, I think, a holographic map display type thing. A legate of the Ultramarines Defense Auxiliary, so effectively a commander of their version of the Imperial Guard. She's got a pretty fancy cape, helmet, crest and power sword there. There's a diplomat and an envoy, helping chart the course of the reconquest. I think she's carrying a sort of official scroll message there, and seems that she's got one hand on a pistol. And then finally a rather gaunt and fancy looking astropath, needed for communication between planets. Overall they make a slightly unusual command squad set together. Interesting to see the Space Marines and regular humans side by side. It seems they're also fairly popular for people wanting to pick them up, though despite Titus' vast recognition within the Space Marine games, it seems that out of you guys that I asked, they're not quite as popular as say the Necrons with the Nightbringer or their new Destroyer Lord. Rules wise, we've had a few of these character and retinue units in the not too distant past, and usually the way that they seem to go is that the character tends to be separated from the main squad. I suspect that Titus will be able to go his own way and lead other units if you want to, though of course will likely have the option to lead the Wardens. His rules could be very different from the Lieutenant datasheet, though I did still think that that had an interesting bit. It allowed him to be a leader who gave his units sustained hits both at range and in melee, which is a basic leader that the Space Marines don't really have. You have the Lieutenant that gives you lethal hits, but it could be quite in demand, say maybe for Stern Guard veterans, and if they did choose to keep that around it wouldn't be the worst idea in the world. Otherwise, for hopes for his datasheet, I'd hope he'd have a slightly punchier chainsword. The Lieutenant version being AP-1 and damage 1 really did it no favours despite lots of attacks and anti-infantry. Even if he had similar sort of stats but put it at damage 2 to make him into far more of a threatening character, they could just choose to give it a big punchy profile, say like Ragnar Blackmane's one. Given that he's now a captain and heading up a sector-wide invasion, maybe he'll have some sort of better overall generalship rule that might have the chance to impact other units and not just his own squad. Though at the same time, similar to Nekrosor Ammentar, he is probably going to have some dedicated detachment to him in his 500 Worlds book, and that might be another chance for his unit to do some special things. I'm genuinely quite curious as to how they represent the Wardens of Ultramar on the tabletop though. I'd guess they'd be only joinable by Captain Titus himself, though they might have a bit more choice. Given the vast array of different models and war gear here, they could be a very complex datasheet indeed, presuming they're not doing something like treating the mortals as like counters for certain abilities or something. If not though, as a bodyguard and retinue style unit, I'd guess they'd probably have OC2 due to that Ancient being present. Matoris looks like the one who'd be bringing the close combat punch, maybe with similar sort of stats to a company champion, something like 5 attacks at strength 5 AP2 damage 2. Then the mortals seem like the sort of characters that will give supporting special rules in some way, shape or form. Masters of the Fleet, as with the Imperial Guard, have often had some help for reserves in the past. The Astropath might have some psychic damage or the ability to strip cover as they did previously. Maybe they'll have once per game abilities or some sort of choose one of these special rules each turn type deal. I'd guess it'd probably be just Titus that can join them as opposed to other captains and things. And I wouldn't be too surprised to see them get similar sort of rules to the company heroes with quite big wound stats and maybe a -1 to wound built in. Moving on from the Space Marines though, and next up we have the Tyranid Prime with the Lash Whip. Tyranid Primes have generally been around in the lore in the past, for a fair while just represented by the Tyranid Warrior kit and the things that you could build from it. They didn't really have their own standalone models until 10th edition when we got the Winged Prime, which while quite fun didn't really feel quite so obvious or appropriate to be having to walk alongside the warriors. In the lore they're basically a hyper-evolved Apex Warrior. Tyranid Warriors already being fairly sophisticated synapse creatures, and these guys kind of function like a mini lieutenant that can direct them to more grand battlefield strategy. Though if there's a more serious Tyranid synapse beast present, then Primes will likely defer command to it, say if there's a Hive Tyrant or Swarm Lord about. In the past they've typically fought with a good number of bioweapons, Lash whips are often used by Tyranids to immobilize the prey before dispatching them with other weapons. Most commonly in the past they're paired with bone swords, but for whatever reason they chose not to give this guy one. Instead it looks like he's got scything talons and regular talons. It does feel to me like the sort of miniature that could well have been a multi-part plastic kit, but they've chosen not to do that. As the sculpt goes, it's maybe not the single most exciting one in the world, but I guess does the job. He's got a twin-tailed whip with some little barbs on the end, a long drooling tongue, and a bigger head crest to mark him out as a special warrior, I guess, raising one foot up on a pipeline that looks like it's been corrupted by some Tyranid goodness. It does strike me as the sort of model that wouldn't really be the hardest to convert in the world if you wanted to make it out of, say, a warrior and a winged prime or something, maybe not being enormously different to them. In terms of reception, it was maybe a little bit more mid than most. You rated him around a 3 out of 5. It looks like he's sort of middling in popularity, in reality not really all that far behind the popular ones. I guess Tyranids are super widely collected at the moment, but still 5th out of the 6 reveals here. Price wise it's probably going to be £27 or $43, that one's based on the Winged Prime. For possible rules, I guess it remains to be seen how Games Workshop are going to give him a niche versus the Winged one. The Winged Prime gives your warriors sustained hits 1, and does have the advantage that by moving faster it can range out the front of them and potentially decrease some charge distances. This Prime I'm sure will be able to join warriors. I kind of wonder whether there's any chance of it joining termagants or hormagaunts. The winged one can join gargoyles. That might just literally be that Games Workshop wanted it to have something wings to be able to lead. Its stat line is likely to be at least fairly similar to the winged one though. I'd be kind of surprised if this guy was any sort of big melee powerhouse having similar sort of weapons. The Winged Prime got 6 attacks at strength 6, AP 1 and damage 2. Lash whips maybe giving you a twin linked on that seems to be the way that they're interpreted with the Hive Tyrant at least. Hopefully he'll be a character that falls into the category of being cheap and effective. The Winged Prime does feel a bit niche at the moment, and warriors in general maybe aren't quite where Tyranid players would hope them to be, not really tanky enough to be used as a main sort of battle line style unit. Lastly, for the wave of 6 new miniatures, we've got Berehk Stornbrow. He's a new Leagues of Votann character, following on perhaps surprisingly quickly after their codex, to the point where it seems a bit weird that he wasn't in the codex if he was coming out straight after. He's one of the Chthonian Berserks, the mining guys who don't tend to fight with a lot of armour but have some boosted genetics and a bunch of mechanical augmentations, and apparently this guy is a dedicated orc hunter nicknamed the Warbreaker for the sheer amount of victories he's had against the Greenskins. His genetic adaptations give him some craggy and unusually resilient skin, and his curious weapon is apparently a blend of plasma, mass and concussion technologies, so basically all the standard Votann close combat weapons made into one, and is more than happy to put it to work against any enemy champion. For the miniature itself, he's certainly got some fun factor, holding up a severed greenskin head here in his bionic hands, apparently having lost his flesh and blood hands in a duel against a rival freebooter captain. Otherwise he's got a slightly odd looking armoured skin, and that rather intimidating hammer and scythe thing, and he's standing on a tactical rock for a little bit of height and stature relative to his kin. Model vibes, he certainly feels like the counterpart of Berehk Stornbrow, the Tyranid hunter with the Darkstar glaive. He does have some fun factor, though still seems to have had a bit more of a mid-reception relative to some of the other model reveals. It feels like quite a lot of the Votann models have had a sort of muted reaction with popular opinion, not really being seen as either standout or terrible, with some elements liked or disliked. Price-wise, I'd guess it'd be the same as Berehk Stornbrow. If so, he'd be £27, $43 or €34. Maybe if Games Workshop's feeling generous, he might be a touch cheaper than that, and does seem to have the most niche appeal out of any of these miniatures, only having around about half the demand of the next least popular in that Tyranid Prime. Rules-wise, it will be a new option for the kin to have a leader for the Chthonian Berserks. Going by most characters, it might further amp them up to be yet more dangerous but yet more fragile overall per point. They already have some fairly general purpose damage output, so anything that he could do to further augment that could potentially be very scary indeed. Given his lore and that massive great melee weapon he's got, I'm sure he'll be packing a personal punch himself. Maybe there's some chance that that will have both a sweep and strike profile, given that you've got a hammer element and a blade element to it. I suspect he's going to be tougher than the average Berserk with that scaly skin, and despite having the big orc head there, if he follows the pattern of Berehk Stornbrow, he is not necessarily going to have any rules that actually make him any better against orcs, and will probably just be a general purpose combatant. It should be fun to find out what these guys are going to do on the tabletop once we get the models released for them and their rules, though it looks like a good few of them might not be materialising till 2026. Let me know your thoughts on the miniatures, any other fun details that you might have noticed that I skipped over, and what your hopes would be for them on the tabletop. That's about it for this one, though before I go, I'll just cycle back to Tabletop Stronghold, the video sponsor, and talk through their range of magnetic carry cases. Here's the amount of miniatures that you can fit on one of their trays that get stacked up in their box sets. You can get around about 90 25mm bases or 6 knight armigers. And then those trays go into the boxes of different heights, the smallest one being this Mag Case Mini. While in the Black Friday sales, this one's £58 or $65. The price includes shipping, though any VAT or import duties will be extra. There's still quite a lot of room, even in the smallest one, as you can see by the big tanks on the lower level here. Otherwise, here's the regular size mag case, $100 or £90. The mag cases come with a supply of magnets to mount to the underside of your models, and there's really quite a lot of room in the middle one for some more normal size collections. Plenty of space for some pretty tall models such as the Chaos Knight on the ground floor. I'll leave the dimensions on the screen now. Then there's the really big one. The XL one basically has two of the previous attached together. Enough room for some entire collections in this one. You can see the acrylic sheet on the front for this one, and there are some buying options for having more or fewer of those steel trays. Depending on how many you need, it can affect the price a little. If you're in the market for terrain as well, they do also have some terrain bundles as well. They come a little cheaper if they're bought alongside a mag case if you want some MDF terrain. In any case though, check them out, link down in the video description if you'd like to. The Black Friday sale is on till early December, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. That's about it for now. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out every day. If you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well. You can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, occasional votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.